The vote on Federal Reserve nominees was stalled today. Republican members on the Senate Banking Committee say that they need more information about one of the nominees, Sarah Bloom Raskin. Republicans are questioning Raskin's relationship with a Colorado-based firm that gained access to the Fed's payment system. Republican Senator Patrick Toomey said that they're willing to vote on Biden's 4 other picks. Democrats control the committee, but with no single Republican attending the session, the vote has to be delayed, including the vote on Fed Chair Jerome Powell's second term. Sarah Bloom Raskin is the wife of current Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin. New evidence has surfaced in the Durham investigation that alleges the Clinton campaign took measures to spy on President Trump. This in an effort to create a narrative linking Trump to Russia. At this point, there is still much that has not been released, but to help us get an understanding of where we are now, we have Mark MECKLER, who is president of Convention of States. Mark MECKLER, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Glad to be with you.
Now, Mark, I want to get your thoughts on the recent findings in the Durham investigation. Allegedly, the Clinton campaign tapped into Trump's servers both at Trump Tower and at the White House and was attempting to make a link between Trump and Russia. Just how big of a deal is this, despite the very little coverage we're seeing from mainstream media?
I think it's an extraordinarily big deal. We've heard for years and years, for decades, this is the next Watergate. This is bigger than Watergate. I think this is way bigger than Watergate. I mean, what you're talking about is a presidential campaign paying money, committing espionage against another presidential campaign, using the government to do so, actually feeding information to the FBI, to the CIA. These are extraordinary revelations, and they also continued to do it after the president became the sitting president of the United States, doing it through the executive office of the president. These are very, very serious allegations, and I hope that if proven true, people go to jail.
Now, Mark, I want to ask you, how were they even able to execute this with such brazenness? Doesn't this raise more questions about the deep state that Trump used to refer to? And what is your interpretation of the deep state? Who are they? How does this apparatus function?
I think it does raise more questions about the deep state. The way they were able to conduct this is there was a third-party contractor that worked for the federal government that had access to these servers and the DNS, the domain name server information, and that's how they were able to get access to this data. And then what you're seeing here is a closed loop, and the deep state really is a closed loop. I think it's broader than just saying bureaucrats or administrative agencies. It is a combination of the Democrat Party, long-term operatives inside the federal government, employees of the federal government, frankly, in every department, but in this case, specifically inside the CIA and the FBI, and then the Democrat media complex. And all of that together makes up a closed loop that allows somebody to go in, get information, feed that information to government agencies, feed it to the media, and creating a closed loop narrative that probably cost President Trump his second term.
Now, Mark, why is the media so mum on this topic, and where do you see this going? Do you think people will go to jail, like you mentioned earlier, and will the media inevitably be forced to report on this?
I think the media is so mum on the topic because, as I described it, they're part of that closed loop. So when you look at the left-wing media complex, the major media outlets, NBC, CBS, ABC, and the like, they're part of the narrative. They hated Trump. They were willing to do anything they could to take down Trump. Before he was elected, during his presidency, and during the reelect, they went after him hard. And so I don't think they're interested in reporting on it. They're not interested in saying how wrong they were on the Russia collusion narrative. There was indeed collusion. It was to create a false narrative that Trump was somehow in bed with Russia. As far as whether anybody will actually be prosecuted, whether people will go to jail, let's just say my hopes aren't high. I've been involved in the political game since about 2009. I was involved in the Tea Party movement. I saw Lois Lerner targeting folks for the exercise of their First Amendment rights. The Inspector General's report made it very clearly that that's what happened, and nobody paid a price. So I generally don't see public officials at a high level pay a price for these kinds of misdeeds.
Mark MECKLER, thank you.
Thank you.
Congresswoman Kathleen Rice said Tuesday that she will not be seeking re-election this fall. She becomes the 30th Democrat to announce they're leaving Congress before the November midterms. Congresswoman Rice announced her plans on her 57th birthday. In a 2-paragraph statement, she didn't specify why she was leaving. She has represented New York's 4th congressional district just outside of New York City for 4 terms. So far, only 13 House Republicans have said that they will not be seeking re-election. Report. Wholesale prices accelerated again in January. That's a fresh sign of the relentless pressure of inflation hitting the United States economy. Today, the Labor Department said that wholesale prices rose to nearly 10% this month on an annual basis. This is slightly below the 12-year record high in November and December, but it's still double what Wall Street had predicted.
Something disruptive going on in the world that further impedes supply lines that are being repaired. We're likely to see the rate of inflation become a bit more muted, but it will keep rising.
Cohen says pandemic fatigue, along with the instability in Eastern Europe, make it difficult to predict what will happen next for the U.S. economy. Some members of Congress are moving to thwart the Chinese Communist Party's influence on U.S. corporations. Senator Marsha Blackburn and Marco Rubio have introduced the No Chinese Communist Surprise Parties Act. If passed, this new bill would require publicly traded companies in the United States to disclose certain information. They have to disclose the presence and governance of any CCP-affiliated organizations within their corporate structure. As of 2016, there were roughly 106,000 foreign firms in China, and around 75,000, that's over 70% of them, have established Communist Party units inside the corporate structure. On Friday, the Virginia House of Delegates passed a bipartisan resolution condemning the Chinese Communist Party's persecution of Falun Gong practitioners. Here's the details.
H.R. 9 is a bill to recognize human rights abuses and educate Virginians about the evils of organ harvesting and forced slave labor prevalent in nations which the U.S. participated in trade.
Bill co-sponsor Kay Corey introduced 2 Falun Gong practitioners on the House floor, including Chunyang Wang, who displayed an item she was forced to make in a labor camp.
Chunyang Wang, a Falun Gong practitioner who was imprisoned in China for 7 years, tortured, and forced to labor making jackets to be sold in the U.S. and Europe, and she's got the jackets with her, so we can all know what not to buy.
Dr. Tatiana Denning testified before the Rules Committee last month with Chunyang Wang. Dr. Denning said Wang and others were tortured simply for following their belief in truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance.
It's benefited the holistic health of over 100 million people around the world, yet it's been persecuted by the Chinese Communist Party since 1999, including forced organ harvesting.
Dr. Denning said 20 of Chunyang's friends and relatives died from persecution. She described the resolution as an expression of our collective conscience, so we do not unwittingly take part in persecution through our dealings with Communist China.
It will prevent Virginia residents from becoming the unwitting accomplices to the murder of innocent people. It will also help educate our citizens that the Chinese people and the Chinese Communist Party are not one and the same.
The resolution states, state-controlled Chinese media inside and outside China use vilification and slander to dehumanize Falun Gong practitioners, to justify these brutal forms of persecution, and to instigate discrimination against them, even on American soil. The U.S. House of Representatives passed a resolution condemning organ harvesting in 2016, but there's been very little media coverage. When people of Virginia started to find out about organ harvesting, they asked local officials to do something. The Virginia resolution condemns China's actions. It also requests that the governor and health department keep the citizens informed. Carrie Nunez, NTD News, Washington, D.C.